Hi guys, welcome to the final lesson of this course. In this lesson, I'm going to show you an easy way to apply colour to your skulls. We'll start with flat colours and we'll later add light and shading to give it a nice effect. So first, create a new layer underneath the line art. This is where we'll paint the basic flat colours. I'm using brush number 36, but you can use a different one if you like. I recommend that for the mask you use a solid and abrupt brush to make things easier for you. You could also make a selection with the pen tool and fill it in. Try out the things that adapt best to your style. I'm going to select a base colour as the main tone of the skull. In this case, I'm looking for a pink shade. I'll paint the whole skull like a mask. Paint the borders carefully as all the following layers will be subordinate to this one. This part might seem a little boring, but as soon as we get more into the colour, you'll see it's much more fun. Remember to save the layers of each skull in a different group so they don't get mixed up and lost. It's important to be organised if you're working with lots of layers. Name them all appropriately so you know what you're working on. The next thing we'll do is separate all the elements of the drawing into different layers and colours. Select the colours that you find interesting for each area, although it's not necessary that all the colours harmonise perfectly, as we're going to unite them all later in a colour range. Place the new layer you created underneath the base layer by clicking on the layer, pressing Alt and clicking on the base layer. Now whatever you paint on that layer won't go out of the borders you painted on the base layer. As you can see, I'm selecting different colours for each area of the skull. I'll try to make them more or less blended with the colour range, but as I said before, we'll worry about that later. So we'll go with a kind of general pinkish tone. You'll see that this effect looks really lovely. Also, when you see the new modified tones, you'll get an idea of what colours to choose next time you paint. We'll do this on a saturated layer where we can change the values of all the colours in the scene, but I'll show you this later. Try and make the colours vary from light to dark so there's contrast, and that if you closed your eyes a little bit, you'll still be able to see the difference between one and another. If you use very similar values, you won't be able to distinguish the colours, and if we stepped back, the design wouldn't look so attractive. Imagine you're painting in black and white. You should be able to distinguish every tone on a grayscale. If you want to check that your colours are different enough, then set the mode to desaturate. If you want, you can try lowering the opacity of the colour layers that you're applying to blend the tones a little. You could also open the hue and saturation window with Ctrl U and adjust the values from there. I always use this tool to modify the hues so I can get the exact tones I want for the scene. Also, I can increase or decrease the luminosity, and this adds some contrast to the design. Let's add some shading to the skull. To do that, I'll change the brush to one that has more transparency and more of a painterly effect. You won't find this brush in the basic brush palette Photoshop offers you, but you can adjust one of them or find new ones online. Okay, we need to change the blending mode of the layer where we're going to work on the shading to multiply. Then, select a purple or violet tone to apply the shading. This color is very common when shading. You could try a different one, but it's usually the best choice. Apply the shadows with the light source in mind. Establish this light source for your skull and paint in the shadows accordingly. I usually lower the opacity of the brush to make some areas darker and vice versa. After painting the main shadows, lower the opacity of this layer until you like the new effect of the shading on the skull. What I'm going to do now is create a new shadow layer and follow the same process as before. Now I'll focus on the darker areas and I have a second layer of shading. Finally, lower the opacity of the layer until you get the effect you like. I recommend that you erase certain areas of shadow to define the shape. If there are areas that you need to be darker, you can go back to previous layers and repaint them. The next thing we'll do is apply the lighting. We'll follow a similar process to the shading. Create a new layer and set the blending mode to soft light. Now choose a lighter color that isn't very saturated. You can saturate it, but you'll see that you get colors that are too intense when you paint. Now apply the lighting depending on the light source you chose. I've selected an orange tone because in general I like yellowish and orange lighting. You can experiment with different light tones and see which ones you think are best for each situation. Just like the shading, we'll create a new light layer to emphasize certain areas. Set the blending mode to hard light. So be careful and use a low saturation so the tone is not too intense. You can try this yourself using saturated and desaturated tones. Apply this light in areas where the light source is stronger or you need your design to stand out. What I'm going to do now is apply soft but dark gradients over the skull to make it more interesting. If you want to do this now, you can. You could have done it in the step before painting the separate parts of the skull. It's up to you. I'm going to select the layers and lock the pixels so the gradient doesn't go out of the lines. Then select darker tones than the ones you have, and with a low opacity, apply the gradients over the skull. Now I'm going to paint the line. I'll save the original line by duplicating the layer, and I'll lock the pixels of the layer where I'm going to work. Now when you paint on the layer, you'll only paint on the line. What I do is select similar tones to the ones I've painted, only darker, and with these I'll paint the line. I like a brush with a low opacity so the tones blend in with each other. With this done, I can apply the final touches. Create a new layer on top of the others but don't subordinate it to the rest. Now using a brush that you like, I'll use a rectangular one, paint on top of all the layers and touch up the areas you want. I like to erase some lines and substitute them for areas of pure colour. Select the tones directly from the design with the eyedropper tool and see how it enriches your painting. I think this part is very fun and creative. Take your time and just enjoy painting and trying out new effects. Finally, what we'll do is create a saturation layer and subordinate it to the layers underneath. In the tool window, select Colorize and adjust the tone. Then lower the opacity of this layer until you're happy with how the colours blend together. See how easy and effective this trick is? Use it whenever you want, but don't forget to still train your eye to select good colours from the beginning. Now repeat this process with all the skulls selecting different tones and settings. And at last the skulls are finished. As you see, the process is very simple and quick. This way you can draw and design all kinds of things. I really hope you enjoyed this course and I'll see you again next time. Bye!